Tethered Nation, you guys have heard me talk about the saddle setup, Tethered Saddle Setup, their Predator platform, for quite some time. This is the second full season that I've used it. I've killed out of it twice now, and really what it has helped me do, I figured instead of, I've given you guys specs, the weight and how light it is, bulky free that it is, and so on and so forth, but I thought today I would give you a little bit of a testimonial. As, I will credit, and there's been a lot of people who've had a lot of influence on how I've started to hunt and how I've kind of evolved as a hunter. But I would say there's been no piece of equipment that's been more instrumental in me making that evolution than Tethered's saddle setups. The reason I say that is that, I'm a guy that works like a normal job like everybody else out there. And so when I go on hunting trips or I'm hunting, I have limited time to get stuff done. So I typically want to hunt more aggressively. And that's something I've challenged myself with the past, year and a half, is to just, to be more aggressive and don't lay back. And the saddle setup has really helped me do that because I've spent much more time with boots on the ground scouting than I ever have in years past. And that's really because I'm not carrying a bunch of bulky stuff into the timber with me. And so I don't mind. It's not a hindrance to carry my saddle setup. And that way, when I find fresh sign, I can get into the tree and I don't have to leave and come back and drop scent. If once I see it, I'm in the tree hunting it. I'm not finding it, setting up a stand, taking the time to do that, then leaving and coming back and hunting it the next day. I'm literally getting into the tree and hunting it at that moment. And I can't say that if I was using any other setup other than a saddle setup, specifically Tethered's gear, that I would be making the same strides I'm making now and becoming a more aggressive and a more mobile hunter. So if this is something that you're interested in, if you want to challenge yourself to be more mobile, more aggressive, and go find deer instead of letting the deer find you, then I would suggest that you go to tetherednation.com and check out all their saddle gear. I guarantee you, if you get into it, you won't be disappointed, and you'll probably become an addict like me. Skull Brew Coffee Company. Everyone loves coffee, and with that, Skull Brew is celebrating Black Friday and Cyber Monday to help you fuel your holiday season. Now through December 6th, you can buy one bag of any Skull Brew coffee and get the second bag for 25% off. Coffee makes a killer Christmas gift and one-ups your relatives because this gift that you're giving is donating to conservation. Or you can just drink the coffee yourself and re-gift those tighty whities your grandma gave you last year. We won't tell. Visit skullbrewcoffee.com and use the promo code HOLIDAY19 at checkout and fuel your holiday with Skull Brew Coffee, and know that you're supporting conservation with every sip. Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 154. Today I'm cranking up another DIY Report mini-series, this time with the godfather of saddle hunting, John Eberhart. So stay tuned. All right. What is going on, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. I hope you're all doing well and feeling good out there. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. I know Thanksgiving's tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Wednesday, it'll be tomorrow. But if you're listening to it any other time, it might have been past already. But regardless, happy Thanksgiving to you. I hope everyone is going to have a little bit of food, whatever food it is that they like. I know John Mulligan, Mr. Utah, doesn't like turkey. He's a ham guy, so hopefully he gets some ham. But I have a cool show for you today. Pretty excited about this show. I guess I should back up for a second and just mention what I've been up to since I got back. I've been up to absolutely nothing, and I'm okay with it. If you followed along with any of the Iowa Rut Log podcast or the wrap up episode that I did, it was a pretty rough 15 days in Iowa that ended well. Needed a little bit of a reprieve when I got back. Had plenty of stuff to catch up on at work. So that's basically what I spent this past week doing, was just grinding at work, trying to get back up to speed on everything. And then of course have the holiday season coming up here. Had my dad in town and my stepmom in town visiting this past weekend. Had a coffee event with the coffee company, with the Skull Brew Coffee Company. We had I guess it was like a holiday craft fair that we were doing this past weekend with my buddy Wilson. Actually, my buddy Wilson was there too. So came back, no rest for the wicked. Was not necessarily busy hunting, but busy with all the other things that I kind of let slide while I was out chasing whitetails. But with that, the holiday season is here. Thanksgiving will be here on Thursday, and then the holiday weekend. This year is a little bit different than years past, where we have, at least for Pennsylvania, we have the gun season coming in on Saturday after Thanksgiving. versus historically it's been the Monday after Thanksgiving. So that's kind of a big change for PA. But it actually works in my favor. I'm one of those people who didn't mind it being on Saturday, because a lot of times, I don't hunt rifle necessarily. I was going to try to get my daughter out, but she's at that age where I don't know that that hunting's necessarily high on her priority list. She enjoys shooting. She enjoys shooting her bow. But she does not enjoy being cold or waking up early. So her desire to sleep and be warm has trumped her desire to go sit in a blind with her dad. But I'm not gonna pressure her into doing that. I want her to enjoy it. And she said she was interested in maybe going and trying to shoot some geese this year potentially. I don't know that she's able to, though. I don't think I can take her for that till next year, if I'm not mistaken. So she might have to wait a year on that. But regardless, I'm gonna, I haven't hunted gun season in several years, at least the opener. I've gone out during the course of gun season with my bow, but I'm actually gonna hunt this opener, and I'm gonna hunt it with a bow this year. The reason being is, I just want to get an extra day in the woods, and it's on Saturday, so I don't have to take a day off. So that's good. And I'll be back home with family and so forth, and my dad will actually be up. And he and I have not hunted together, and I think I chronicled this last year. We had a hunt planned together last year during pre-rut on his property. It's like 60 acres back home that I do a little bit of food plot work on and stuff like that. I think I hunted it 3 days last year. I have yet to hunt it this year at all. Been all public land so far this year. But he's actually going to be headed back there and going to be hunting the opener of rifle, I think, Saturday. And I think he's also going to stick around and hunt Monday too. And so just coincidentally, we'll both be there. And I was planning to head to that property since my daughter wasn't going to hunt. Because there's nobody on that piece, I had assumed. And so I was going to, it's kind of a little bit of a sanctuary for deer in the area because no one gun hunts that spot really. And so I figured I'd go back and hunt that. And talking to my dad this weekend, I know he's going to be back there hunting. So we're actually going to get to hunt together. And I think it's the first time that we'll hunt together since like 2002 or something like that. So it's been a long time coming. So I'm going to hunt with the old man, which is cool. I think he's going to use his gun. I think he's going to use his rifle. But I'm going to take my bow a walk. And I've not been back to the property since June. I think June. I'm pretty sure it was June. Maybe it was July. But pretty sure it was June. And I haven't checked trail cameras or anything. There was one good deer that I had during the summer that was back there. There's always seems to be one homebody deer, homebody buck on that property every year that is around. That's a good deer. And so I'm hoping that's the case when I head back there this coming weekend. But I don't really have any expectations. I don't really know what my plan is going to be. I shouldn't say that. I kind of know where I'm going to set up. I need to check the wind because I feel like once guns start cracking, I kind of know where they're going to kind of move to. And I think my goal really is to try to slip in the morning, and I think I can maybe catch one cruising coming back to bed. That's kind of what my hope is, and there's a lot of doe bedding in this general area as well. And so before the chaos starts of the guns cracking and so forth, I might be able to catch one maybe acting somewhat normal. For this time of year, which is maybe, starting to look around for another doe coming out of lockdown and so forth. I know John and I talked about this time of year around Thanksgiving is oftentimes, can be good for finding a big deer. Looking for that, last doe that's going to come in at the beginning of December-ish, to get that final doe bred. And so I'll be kind of hoping to get a little bit of that magic, I think, this coming Saturday. But that's really my whitetail update. After that, I'll come back here to the Philadelphia area, and I'll get back on it, and start really kind of gearing up for late season. I'll hunt during gun season with a bow around here on some small parcels where there's not, where gun hunting is not, you're not able to hunt with the gun just because of the size of the piece and how close homes are and stuff like that. So that's usually a lot of times during gun season where I'll focus my attention is on those pieces. And then once gun season kind of goes to, comes to a close, then I'll kind of head back out into like the larger pieces of timber. But I think this late season, I would love to fill my buck tag, but I think there's a couple larger parcels of public land that I want to really get boots on the ground. And I think what I might end up doing is hitting some of those and scouting / hunting those here all late season, in part because I'd like to kill a decent deer. But the other part is that I'm kind of almost starting like my postseason scouting. I don't want you to think I'm throwing in the towel on this year necessarily. But there's a couple larger chunks of public that I want to try to spend some time on because I'm just kind of the bigger woods kind of setting, I'm learning fits me better because I can cover ground, and I prefer to kind of do that. And that's another thing I think the Iowa trip taught me, was I do prefer the larger pieces, because I can go find deer and not necessarily have to wait for deer to come to me. Again, like I think I mentioned this in the upfront whenever I was doing the some of the ads at the beginning, talking about tethered and talking about the saddle setup. I mean, that's really what, was the linchpin for me, or the catalyst, if you will, for being able to really, really, truly hunt super mobile this year, was being able to kind of hunt that light and going and finding deer versus finding a spot that I think deer should travel through and wait for them to come through. So it's I took more of a, what you might call a DeQuisto, approach, where it's like I was willing to bump deer to find them, and because I just wanted to know there were deer in a spot before I was going to set up, which for some people might seem counterintuitive, and for a lot of years it seemed very counterintuitive for me as well. Now, granted, you can get away with a little bit more in Iowa because you're dealing with less pressure, but I think the principles are the same. Like I think in some cases you can't be afraid to move some deer around, as long as you're not, as long as it's not day after day after day. I think you'll be okay, especially if it's a piece that's brand new, and that's what I was dealing with in Iowa. So I'm going to try to take some of those things that I learned out there and apply them best I can here, and I'm sure I'll talk about them throughout the course of the year about how it worked and how it didn't and how I might have to adjust it. And I think that's the beauty of hunting a bunch of different places, as you get a bunch of different perspectives. So with that, we'll go ahead and get rolling on to today's show. Got a really cool DIY report mini series here. I love doing these. These are probably some of my favorite pieces of content to put out. And I did a show a while ago with John Eberhart, and John's just a really good dude, and he and I have stayed in contact via text and email and so on and so forth. And been wanting to have him back on, and so I was just trying to think through what how I wanted to make a DIY report miniseries with him, because he's just a wealth of knowledge, and you can dive super deep into different topics with him, and the well never runs dry. And so we finally found time to do it. He was on the mend from a surgery that he had, so he had maybe a little bit of downtime, more so than he would have in other years during hunting season. So we took advantage of that, and we're doing a 3-part miniseries with Mr. Eberhart. And I think there'll be areas that I think all of you will dig and can take something from. Now, I will apologize that my hope was to try to get this stuff out earlier in the season, prior to season hitting. I know season is not coming to a close, but it would have been nice to have this at the beginning of the year. Schedules just weren't lining up for us to do that. But that doesn't mean we can't take some of these learnings into the late season, because I think some of this stuff still applies. And then ultimately, take some of this stuff and put it in your memory bank as we always are kind of on the hunt, or evolving and getting ready for the next season. It's a constant learning opportunity. Hunting, at least, is for me. It's constant evolution. So I'm always looking for information. So with that, the 3 parts we're going to cover is today's part is we're going to really focus on exit and entry routes. John is really big on exit and entries, so much so that he oftentimes, and you'll find when we talk through, his entry and exit routes are usually different. And a lot of people will say that they're prioritizing entry and exit, and they'll have it might work really well on entry, and then they deprioritize exit because they're leaving that spot and not hunting it. But John's really looking at it from the perspective of not wanting to damage it for future hunts at all. And so he oftentimes will have separate routes for his entry and his exit. And we talk in depth about how he kind of plans that out and what he looks for. And is it seasonal? Is it time of day? So all those factors, he kind of come into play for him, and we cover all those. The second part we'll release these every other week with a longer version, our usual long form show in between. The second part of this series we're going to do with John is hunting active scrapes. This is something that I used a lot this year, started using them last year. Years prior, I always struggled hunting scrapes, and it wasn't until I read his book and I had a chance to really talk to him on the show and talk to him outside the show, whether it was email or text or phone call or whatever, where I started really learning how to hunt scrapes, specifically primary scrapes. And that was, I will say 100%, one of the keys to the amount of activity I was seeing while I was in Iowa. It was kind of the perfect marriage of of using a lot of what I've learned from John, but also a lot of what I've learned from Dan Enfault. So it was a combination of Eberhart and Beast Tactics was really what was kind of allowing me to have the success I was having in Iowa. And then the last section we'll do with John, and this again is something, I don't think is specific to him. He's coined the phrase, but I know this is very beast oriented as well. But it's freelance hunting. And that was pretty much, I would say, like 85% of the hunting I was doing while I was in Iowa was freelance. I was walking into a place and figuring it out because it was all kind of foreign to me. And so freelance hunting is something that John is really good at. He has a kind of a method and a system as to how he kind of goes about it. And so in part 3 of the DIY Report miniseries, we cover that as well. So I think we have a lot of really cool content in this series. I think you guys will really dig it. I'm excited for you guys to hear it. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get cracking. And as always, thank you all for listening. Oh, before I go, one other thing. John has a whitetail workshop that will be coming up in March and April. If you just Google John Eberhart, it will take you to the whitetail workshop page. You can sign up. There's some, it's a pay thing. So, you sign up and you pay some money, you go, and he does a ton of stuff in the workshop, sharing a lot of his tactics, tips, stuff like that, actually taking you out to trees, showing you his saddle setups and how he preps trees. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So be sure to check out that page. And now, without further ado, we're going to talk to John Eberhart. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. You are listening to yet another edition of the DIY Report miniseries, and I had this gentleman on. It was probably almost like 70 some odd episodes ago. I think it was episode 74. I have on no other than Mr. John Eberhart. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. A little under the weather, but doing well.
How's your shoulder doing? You feeling good?
I actually raised my bow up to 43 pounds yesterday, so I've been hunting the last 2 days.
Nice. Yeah, I know whenever we talked earlier I think it was either early fall or late summer, where you were having shoulder surgery. What did you have? Was there an injury there, or was it just normal wear and tear?
No, it was an injury. I ripped off, when I was prepping trees in the spring, I ripped my bicep off my shoulder.
Oh, man.
The tendon ripped off my shoulder, and I'm sure it was worn anyway. So basically, I went in and she cut the tendon flush, and she drilled a 6 millimeter hole underneath my armpit into my arm bone, and she put the tendon in the arm bone, and then kind of sutured it where it'd stay in place. And I couldn't do anything with my left arm for 3 months.
Right.
And she also did the typical rotator cuff while she was in there. She cleaned up the bone spurs and the arthritis.
Right. Well, while you're in there, you might as well clean house, I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Nice. Well, I'm glad you're on the mend. I'm glad you're able to get back out in the out into the timber and out into the deer woods. Want to thank you for doing this DIY Report miniseries. So this will be a 3-part series. As all the other, for the listeners out there, as all the other DIY Report miniseries have been, and we're going to cover a host of topics. And if you want some, a longer form podcast, as I mentioned, I'd done one with John. I think it was episode 74, and I had a chance to read one of your books. Several. I guess it was probably almost 2 years ago, and that's kind of was, the follow-up to that was the first podcast that we did. And then you and I have stayed in touch over the past, year and a half, 2 years, and trading some emails and so forth. And you actually shared some papers with me of some articles that you've written. And I had a chance to read through those on some flights for work. And I just kind of started thinking, I was like, man, there's some really good nuggets in here that we could get into that are some depth of content about certain ways you approach certain aspects of your hunting, and thought that would make a really good DIY report. And so what we're going to cover in these is exit and entry routes, which I think, is ultimately, imperative to good hunting opportunities, but I think are oftentimes thrown by the wayside to the degree, whether it's because they're tough, difficult, or whether it's just limited based on the property and what you have access to. The other thing we want to talk about, and this is something I've really picked up from you and have taken to heart, is hunting active scrape areas and primary scrape areas. It's actually had my best encounter this year based on that kind of hunting methodology. And then the other thing I've actually been adopting a lot more this year. So as you can tell, John, you've had a big influence on how I approach things. is freelance hunting, and those will be the 3 topics that we'll dive into. And the first one today will be exit and entry routes. So, John, we'll start there. And I guess the first question really is, I know you do a lot of work, as you'd mentioned, as you got your injury prepping trees. But you prep a lot of locations throughout the off season. That way you have a lot of places to go beyond your freelance opportunities. So we've prepped locations, and we're now looking for our best entry and exit routes. What type of questions are you asking yourself when you're looking to choose your access for in and out?
Well, the first question I ask myself is, what is this location good for? Is it an early season location? Is it a rut phase location? Is it a morning location? Is it a midday location? Is it an evening location? Because all of those questions have to be answered before I decipher where I want my entry and my exit routes. So let's say, for example, let's say I'm at a white oak tree, and this white oak tree, I'm hunting public land and knock on doors for free permission only stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm hunting a white oak tree, or let's say an apple tree in Michigan, there's lots of lost apple trees here and there. On an apple tree, it's going to be strictly an evening location because I would spook deer going in with my morning entry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and enter this location in the least invasive manner possible, where I've got the least potential of spooking any deer with my entry. So let's say it's 40 yards off, or let's say it's 80 yards off of a crop field or a weed field or something like that. Because it's going to be an evening location, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the middle of the field, whatever field it may be. And if it's standing corn, I would probably just walk 3 or 4 rows in the corn from the edge of the cornfield. But if it's a short crop, hay, soybeans, just weeds, I'm going to walk through the middle of the field, and then when I get equal to where I have to go into the timber to get to the white oak or whatever scrape area, something that's a destination location for an evening hunt, then I'm going to just make a beeline right in there. So I'm just going to be walking directly from the field, because there's not going to be any deer out in that field during the daytime, obviously.
Right.
And it's an evening hunt. So I'm just going to walk directly from the tree edge to my location. Because a lot of times if you walk the edge of fields, or edges of openings, or edges of cover to weeds or something like that, if you walk the edges, you'll spook deer that may be bedded 40 or 50 yards inside of the edge, inside of the timber, especially when the foliage is down and the deer have a big visual from where they may be possibly bedded. I'm not typically worried about busting any mature bucks, because they're going to be back in the junk farther.
Right.
But concerned about, spooking does and fawns and maybe a subordinate buck that may be bedded out closer to the edges. So that's the least invasive way of entering that location. And then I try to make an exit route, because it's going to be an evening location. I try to make an exit route that's not going to impede into the field. Okay. If it's a crop field, there's going to be deer out there feeding. So I make an exit route that's going to be maybe 40 or 50 yards inside the timber, and then I'll wait a half hour after dark before I exit to make sure all the deer have went by and they're out in the crops or whatever. They've passed through, and then I'll make my exit half hour after dark, so I'm not spooking as minimal deer as possible with my exit.
Right. So
that's an entry and exit route. You always want to make your entry route where you're spooking the least amount of deer. I don't worry about wind, so I don't worry if the wind's blowing from where I'm walking the edge of a swamp or a marsh area, the edge of a bedding area. I'm not worried about my wind blowing into the bedding area and spooking deer. So
right.
I just want to put that out there right off the get-go.
Yeah, 100%. So when you're walking through the middle of the field, I often use this same kind of philosophy whenever I'm entering, if I have that type of access for an evening. But is there any truth to, like, a lot of times I often will avoid the edge, not just because of the bedding aspect of it, but knowing that deer are edge creatures. Like, I'm trying to stay away from places where there's definitive edges where I think that they'll travel to, just because I don't want them to pick up my ground scent. So if I'm walking through, if I have a field access to a degree, to your point, I will walk dead through the middle of it if it's a bean field or whatever, because I only want my intersection of their possible travel route to happen pretty much right in front of where the tree is that I'm going to be walking into. So I have the least amount of, I guess, ground scent, if you will. Do you follow kind of a similar practice as well?
I don't worry about ground scent.
Okay.
Because I'm a scent lock guy, so I don't worry about odor at all.
Right.
But I totally understand what you're saying. I don't like walking edges. My main reason for not walking edges is I'm concerned about spooking deer that are bedded just inside the edge.
Okay.
There's ferns or some brush or something like that. There's very likely going to be does bedded within 50 to 100 yards.
Right.
And because most of my hunting revolves around the rut phases when all the foliage is down, they have a pretty big visual.
Right.
So, if you're walking the edge of something, a deer bedded 50 to 100 yards probably inside the timber has a good chance of seeing you or possibly hearing you also.
Right.
Another not to walk down the edges, there's going to be noise.
Right.
So when you're walking the field, you're not worried about noise. You're just straight beeline from the edge of the field to your tree.
Right.
And I killed a big buck in Ohio in, I think, 2016, 140 incher. This guy invited me down there in December, and him and his buddy had both missed this big 10-point and during gun season. So he invited me down there because they were done, and I went down there 2 days after the gun season ended. And what they were doing wrong is there was this weed field, and then there was some, and it was an old hay field, so there was hay in the weed field as well, from the year before.
Yep.
They let it overgrow, and they were walking the edge of the timber, and right along the edge of the timber, just to the right of the timber, it dropped down, and there was some really heavy pucker brush and briars and stuff, and there were deer bedding probably within 40 yards of that edge because it made a little drop down into some low damp ground, and it was really brushy. And they were spooking deer, and they admitted it. They would because they were walking that edge, they'd spook does and fawns and stuff. And well, when they run off, obviously, if there's a good buck there, when he gets up and moves, he's not going to go the direction they ran off from.
Right.
So I ended up totally eliminating my morning hunts. So I was going to be there for 5 days, and so I was planning on 10 hunts, 5 morning, 5 evening. I eliminated my morning hunts because there was no way I could access this location without spooking deer on a morning hunt because they were out in that field. So there was no way of doing that. So what I did is I went out through the middle of the field and made a beeline right to the tree that I prepped, and I ended up killing that deer because of that. I just made a beeline, and my tree was right on the edge of the field. It was in a big pine right on the edge of the field. Right. The first night I passed up a 2.5-year-old 6-point that I thought about shooting because it was really nasty weather and I wanted to go home. Right. So I entered through the field and passed on that big 6-point, and then when I exited again half hour after dark. I exited through the bedding area. I went down over the hill through the brush well after they had all passed by. Of the deer went out into the field, and then I exited that way. So I wasn't spooking anything with my entries because there was nothing in the weed field during the evening when I was going in, and there was nothing in the bedding area half hour after dark when I left.
Right. Does your exit and entry always differ? Are they always different access routes?
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll come through a crop field and wear waders and cross a river and go into some thick stuff, and then when I exit, I don't go back out through the weed field. I go through the marsh or down the edge of the marsh a half hour, 45 minutes after dark, and go out around the edge and then across the river and go out on the edge of the crop field, as opposed to when I came in, I came right through the middle of the crop field.
Okay.
But yeah, they're typically different.
Okay.
I would say 80% of the time my entry is different than my exit.
Okay. Because I think that's one mistake folks probably make is when they have good access, say they have good access for entry, they just assume that it's going to be good access for exit as well. And I think that's one thing that I've started to learn is that my way in and out, depending on each scenario, may not be the same. I may have to exit the different way that I've entered and vice versa. And so, because I've kind of experienced what you've talked about avoiding, which is blowing up a hunt before it ever got started because my access was wrong, or educating deer on my way out that ended up ruining opportunities I may have had, further into the season if I just would have exited correctly. So, yeah, learning curve there for me. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, I think people can kind of wrap their head around, an access, exit and entry route strategy when they know the location that they're going to hunt, right? When they have something that's pre-prepped. But can you talk to me a little bit about how you approach access when you're freelancing, versus your prepared locations?
Well, freelancing is totally different because what I consider a DIY freelance hunt is where you have never been in this spot or area ever before. So you're going in with your steps and your saddle and your bow, and you're going in to hunt. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty hard to make an entry in it, to know what the entry and exit routes are going to be because you've never been there and you don't know where you're going to end up hunting.
Right.
Obviously, if you're hunting in an area that has openings, on an evening hunt, because typically most freelance hunts are evening hunts because you can't go in the dark and find a new location, obviously.
Right.
So they're typically going to be evening hunts. So you try and stay in the most open areas you can, or skirt the edges of what you'd consider bedding areas, swamps, marshes, cattail marshes, brush, mm-hmm. stuff like that. So yeah, you definitely would want to skirt the edges, not just, obviously you can't go in on a DIY hunt and just bust into a bedding area because you're going to spook the deer there.
Right.
So you got to do edges and go through openings and try and find places on edges or just inside the edge where you can hunt. A lot of times you'll walk the edge on an evening hunt and you'll see, especially during the rut phases, because the foliage is down. Foliage being down makes a big difference from early season.
100%.
You'll see a lot of times, your oaks hold your leaves longer, and a lot of times you'll see in the distance, maybe in some timber or something, you'll see some green or brown leaf trees, and they're typically oaks because they hold their leaves longer than the other ones. So then if you're skirting an edge or something or coming across a weed field, you see them in the distance, that's a place I'd want to beeline to because it's, that's going to be a destination location. And I'm a big destination hunter.
Yeah.
So actually figuring out entry and exits, I guess that would be hard to do, but while you're going in, the only thing you really have to worry about on a DIY hunt is your entry.
Right.
For an evening hunt. Your exit, after the fact, isn't going to be that critical unless it's a spot you're setting up and you plan on hunting again. And then when you get out of the tree in the evening after the hunt's over on a DIY, if you plan on going there again, you're very likely going to have to bust brush.
Right.
So going out in a manner where the deer are not at that time.
Yeah,
but in timber, deer tend to browse and just, on public land, and most of it's timber, and deer tend to browse. So typically you're going to spook something with your exit no matter what you do.
Right. I think the one thing I've taken to doing, because I've adopted more freelance hunting this past year, or this season that we're currently in, is I spend, I think, a lot more time looking at my topo and satellite imagery, trying to figure out higher ground typically, because a lot of the places I'm hunting have a lot of swamp in them. And so I know if I have a little bit of elevation change, I'm probably going to be able to get out of the swamp in a little cleaner walking. That way I'm not making as much noise versus staying in a lower area. And so I'm always trying to look to see how quickly can I get to the high ground because I'll usually look and there'll be a topography feature and I'll be like, okay, this is an area I kind of want to be. I want to check this spot out. So I'll try to look at the topo and look at the satellite imagery and be like, all right, well, what looks thick? What doesn't look thick? Is there an elevation change I can use to get out of the lower lying swampy, marshy stuff to get into some cleaner walking? And then can I easily make it then to the place I'm trying to get to? That's the one thing that I've tried to do. I actually just did that last night and got hung up in some briars and stuff because I zigged when I should have zagged. But it is what it is. I saw deer, so it was all good. But I never heard of the oaks holding leaves longer. But that makes sense. That's a good strategy to use, especially when you're going into a place that you're not familiar with. So I'm gonna file that in the old memory bank. That's never heard of that before.
Well, usually oaks are taller, and I mean, I was hunting last evening, and it was just so obvious. All the maples, the popples, the beech trees, everything else had dropped all the leaves. And the oaks were the only thing that held leaves. Some were green, some were brown, but they still had lots and lots of leaves. And I'll look at my onyx too, but I don't really look for openings for the most part. When I'm looking at my onyx, when I'm freelancing, I'm looking for trees.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually onyx pictures are from some semblance of summer or spring. So I'm not looking for dark green stuff because that's typically going to be pines,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm looking for, like stands of trees, and then I'll hit the topo and see if it is a little bit higher ground.
Mm-hmm.
And typically there's going to be some oaks in that, at least up in the northern states. I don't know about the southern states. I've never hunted down there, but I'm always looking. When I'm freelance hunting, I am 100% always looking for destination sites, preferably feeding, because all buck activity during the rut revolves around doe activities. So when you find places where does are feeding on a consistent basis, that's where you're going to have your best opportunities for bucks, or else, in a bedding area. But again, it's pretty hard to freelance hunt in a bedding area without spooking everything out with your entry on an evening.
Right. So that's actually a really good segue, because the next thing I wanted to ask you about is two things. So this will be a two-parter, is choosing the right tree, right? So you're freelancing and you're trying to find the right tree, or we can even look at it from a perspective of, maybe the property and you've prepped the tree. How are you choosing that tree? And then how are you selecting the specific tree that you want to be in? What are you looking at to achieve when you select a specific tree, and, what should it allow you to do?
I love that question, because that's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. And I've written articles on selecting the right tree and preparing the right tree.
Right.
Sunlight comes into play on this a little bit, because I'm not worried about getting winded or touching vegetation. So typically, if I've found a destination spot, or let's say there's a tiny little opening and there's two or three runways converging there, and that's the best sign I've seen to this point, or I see a white oak or whatever, a beech nut tree, and that's going to be where I'm going to set up. I will make a circle. I'll take the runways, or I'll make a circle around the little area, and I'll look at all the trees while I'm making that circle. I'll also look at, on public land, I will look at how they're, what type of shooting lanes there are, because you can't cut shooting lanes on public land.
Right.
So I'll be looking at the trees and looking at the sign in the area, and also looking at the trees in conjunction with what kind of shooting lane openings do I have, and that's how I will pick out the tree. And once I pick out the tree, now this is on private ground. If I'm freelance hunting on private ground, I will clean up a couple little shooting lanes first before I prep the tree. This is on private, and I did this in Iowa when I killed my biggest buck ever. So I'll clean up a couple little shooting lanes. I won't clean them like I would if I'm going in postseason and prepping a location that I'm going to hunt in the future, where I'm going to clean some wide shooting lanes. But I'll clean the shooting lanes, then I'll prep the tree once I'm up the tree. Because when I'm prepping the tree, my bow and my backpack is still on the ground.
Okay.
I'm going up the tree with my saddle on, with my safety linesman's belt on, with my steps going up the tree. Once I get up to the top where I want to be, then I will look at the little shooting lanes that I've cleared and say, okay, now I need to get rid of that branch, or I need to get rid of that branch or that over there. Because a lot of times people make a big mistake, is they'll prep the tree and then they'll come back down and clear some shooting lanes, and then they get back up in the tree and they forget stuff. So if you prep the shooting lanes while you're looking at the location in the tree you plan on being at, you prep the shooting lanes, then you get up in the tree, you've got the tree prepped. Now you got to go down to get your bow anyway. You look at your lanes again before you go back down, and you notice there's always something you missed.
Right. Always.
And you go clean that up and then go get in the tree. But I also am looking at the time of the year I'm hunting it. So if I'm hunting early season where the foliage is on the tree, I typically won't have to get up as high because I got good background cover. But if I'm going in during the rut phases and all the foliage is down, as I'm walking around looking at trees, I'm looking at the tree that's going to give me the best cover. I see a lot of YouTube videos of guys in saddles, and they're hunting in these 14-inch diameter trees. Those just don't offer adequate cover, if you're going to hunt 20, 25 feet. To me, in Michigan, you get picked. You just get picked. So I'm looking at trees that may have a crotch, up there 25, 28 feet, something where I can get up out of their peripheral vision, because I'm basically going to be skyline,
Right.
From a deer's perspective, when they're looking, in trees, you've basically got a sky background. You don't have any leaves in the trees or any trees behind you with some background cover to break your body silhouette up. So you got to get up high enough to be out of their peripheral vision and where you can get away with some movements. Because a lot of guys that I see, they get in trees and they get in so low, 18, 20 feet, and then deer come in and they can't make a move. You can't move, because once deer pick that movements up when they're low. The lower you are, the easier it is for deer to pick up movements.
Yeah.
Because you're in their peripheral vision.
Yep, 100%. I mean, that background cover, especially, even this time of year when you still have some leaves on the trees, and depending on what you're, like yesterday when I was doing that freelance, I was on the edge of a cedar thicket, and so everything's pretty low and everything's just like, how cedars are, they're just like all stemmy and just crap everywhere. So I really was only able to get up if I wanted any shooting opportunity. This is public, of course, right? So it's any shooting opportunity, I had to stay within kind of below the line of all the branches and all the limbs, so I was only up maybe 12 feet, but I had so much background cover and breakup. I chose the right tree that I had a doe walk in and stand at 5 yards, and she was looking straight at me and kept on going about her business. You know what I mean? Like, I just had so much breakup behind me that I just looked like a mess of crap among all the rest of the mess of crap that's in there.
Yeah. Well, I have it. Yeah. Like what I was talking about early season, when you got a lot of foliage around you in the tree and behind you, yeah, you can definitely set up lower. I've shot deer at 12 feet off. I think the lowest I've ever sat was 10 feet, and I was actually in a cedar tree.
Right.
But that was obviously not on public land, because I had to rape part of the tree to sit in it. There was one runway. I knew this buck was coming out on this very runway. It was right next to a cattail marsh, and I just cleaned out the cedar tree probably 10 feet up to my feet, just enough so I could get that one shot to that runway. And on the very first evening hunt, I killed that buck. But I had to cut part of the cedar. I had to probably a quarter of the cedar where I was at. I had to cut.
Yeah. So with that being said, you're in that cedar tree. What type of trees do you prefer? Like, if you're going in, all things being equal, right? Because I know you're looking to set up a shot opportunity at destination sites. So let's just say you have your pick a tree. Any one of them are going to give you the shot to that destination site. What trees do you prefer to get into typically?
Oaks. Hands down, no competition. Maples have way too many branches.
Mm-hmm.
Oaks are hardwood, so I'm, I don't have to worry about if I step on a branch or something, it breaking. Oaks typically hold some leaves. Oaks typically, when they're not just straight trunk for 40 feet until they hit a branch. Typically, oaks go up there, and there's going to be some crotches. Mm-hmm. And I just love hunting out of oaks. That's nice. By far my favorite. Beech also have a lot of branches. Beech and maple just are very branchy trees.
Right.
So once you get up there, especially on a freelance hunt, it's hard to find a shot through the branches, especially in low light.
Yeah.
You may be up there and it's 2 hours before dark, and you can see I got a little shooting hole right there. Yeah, well, when it gets 15 minutes before dark and everything's dusky and you can't see those little branches anymore,
yeah,
you're pretty much screwed.
Right.
Whereas oaks don't have that kind of they're just not that branchy.
Right.
And usually big, and they're tall, and they're hard, and you don't have to worry about, if you get up in a smaller diameter tree, you don't have to worry about it swaying as much as a soft tree.
Right.
When you make a move.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's the climbing aspect too. It's like, I hate nothing more than whenever I'm climbing, whether it's, especially in the morning, whenever I'm in the dark, in an area and I'm climbing and I'm having to maneuver around a bunch of branches where it's like, I'm unclipping my lineman's belt and putting my tether on. So I'm always strapped in and I'm going back and forth. It's just a bunch of extra work to be done. And it's just kind of a pain in the ass, to be honest. So I agree with you.
Now on private, I will say on private land, my preference would be a pine tree, because I'm always going to have cover.
Yeah, yeah, and good scent cover too. In addition to your scent lock suit, just because everything will smell piney.
I never worry about scent.
I know.
And it's a non-factor. The only time I worry about scent is when I'm setting up at a primary scrape area. If there's an adequate tree on the predominantly downwind side of the scrapes, which winds usually at the northwest in the fall and during the rut, I'll set up a tree on the southeast side if there's an adequate tree, because big bucks typically have a tendency, especially if they're checking a scrape during midday, of checking it from downwind and not going into the scrape. So if I set up a location 20 yards off the scrapes on the southeast side and then have a shooting lane, 20 yards southeast of my tree, if a deer circles around anything 40 yards from the scrapes, I've got a shot.
Right.
Whereas if I set up on the northwest side of the scrapes and he comes 40 yards downwind of the scrapes, I don't have a shot.
Right. And so I was going to ask this question, but I think you've already kind of answered. It sounds like you prefer to have, well, actually, I will ask it because I know you like to clear shooting lanes, but we talked about back cover. So do you prefer, if you had to pick one or the other, do you prefer lots of cover or do you prefer to have a more than adequate shooting lanes?
Oh, I definitely want to have a shooting lane.
Yeah.
If I have a tree that's inadequate, I just go higher. That's my mantra. If the foliage is down and I need to get up there 30 feet to get out of their peripheral vision because I don't have any background cover, the higher you go, the less apt a deer is to see you in a tree. That's all. That's
right.
That's all there is to it.
Right.
So, but if you don't have a good, I can't believe how many times I walk, because when I get permission on just knock on doors, there's always other people there. Right. There's always a lot of other hunters there, and it blows my mind. I'll walk, and this is places where they can clear shooting lanes.
Right.
And I'll walk, and I'll see a tree stand or something, and I'll walk around that tree and on the runways. And there's no way they could get a shot. There's just brush everywhere. Right. It's like, what's the sense of being in a tree if you don't have a shot when a deer goes by? It's ridiculous. So, shooting lanes is critical, and obviously, there are occasions in trees where you just have to sit like a rock. You just can't even move your head around that much because there isn't a lot of cover in the tree. But typically, I just go up the tree higher, but I always look for a tree on a DIY hunt where I've got some openings for shots.
Right.
Because if you don't have a shot, it's irrelevant of deer even being there.
Right. It's like you put in all that work and then the opportunities are few and far between, right, of getting that shot opportunity. And so you do as much as you can to maximize it.
Yeah. So. For instance, the biggest buck I've probably freelanced, I guess on freelance hunts, I've probably taken 10 Pope and Young bucks freelance hunting. And my biggest one was a 180 incher. And I was sitting in it, and this was in Iowa, and this was not on public land. It was on knock on doors for free permission property. And I was hunting this spot in the morning, and I kept seeing movement back closer to the river, back probably, 200 yards to my south. So I got down. I was planning on an all-day sit, and I got down at like 9 o'clock because I wasn't seeing much. And I had a decoy out where I was hunting. I put the decoy in the bag and just left it there. And I just slowly freelanced back in through the timber. And I found a primary scrape area from hell. There was 4 scrapes. And they were huge. And one of them was pungent. It had just been urinated in. And I set up a location. I shot that buck that evening.
Nice.
And, but that was at a scrape. That was at a primary scrape area. So if you set up at a primary scrape area, you're always going to have an opening to shoot to. Yeah. And he was actually at the scrape, working the scrape when I shot him at 12 yards.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good stopping point for this part number 1, because we're going to dive into part number 2, which is actually hunting active scrape areas. So is there anything else to add with the idea of extra exit and entry routes and choosing locations that we need to add on to? Or are we good to go?
I would just tell everybody, just anytime you pick a location, now these are preset locations. Obviously, we discussed the problems with freelance hunting. It's hard to pick entry routes because you're looking for something. So, right. But on any preset location, just always think, where is the least possibility of me spooking deer to enter this location, and where is the least possible amount of deer going to be to exit this location? And a lot of hunters, I never wear a headlamp. I always use a little AAA single cell flashlight. All I want to see is the ground and my tacks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of hunters, when they get done hunting on an evening hunt, or when they're going in on a morning hunt, they got these headlamps on. Mm-hmm. And even the guys at the Public Land Challenge, I was kind of shocked, had almost everybody wore headlamps. Mm-hmm. I don't think Dan did. Right. But it just blows my mind, because when you're walking in, you know, you're turning your head and that light's going everywhere. And during the rut phases, when the foliage is down, if people think deer can't see that, they're crazy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, when they get done with a hunt, they figure, well, I'm finished hunting, so my exit is irrelevant. Well, if you plan on hunting in that area again, no, your exit is not irrelevant.
Right.
Your exit is very important, especially if you're going to hunt that same tree again. Yep. Because if you spook deer with your exits, the older bucks have memories. Yeah. You know, to kill does and subordinate bucks, that's a totally different animal than, you know, a 3.5-year-old buck and older. Right. When you're after those bigger, mature bucks, you have to think differently, and every detail matters. Everything.
Yeah. Agreed. And that was one of the things that I've learned over time as well, is where, you know, now I have a headlamp. It's and if I need to track blood at night, of course I have the.
Well, that's
right. But
I understand.
When I walk in and out, I'm basically using my red light, because I don't want. To your point, I basically just want to be able to see the ground and enough to not knock my eyes out walking through brush, essentially. But last night on that freelance hunt that I did, I didn't know exactly how I was going to get out. I knew I didn't want to get out the same way I came in, because I was kind of scouting my way through to where I was going to hunt. And so I was in some areas that typically you probably wouldn't want to be in if you were trying to access it, but I was trying to find hot sign. And so I was like, I need to just figure out where the deer are at in this piece. And so on my way out, it was overcast, and I knew it was going to get dark a little earlier than it typically does. So with just a little bit of daylight left, I ended up getting down, because I knew if I get out with a little bit of daylight, and I'm talking like, you know, an extra 15 minutes of daylight, getting down 15 minutes early, that I'll be able to see enough with no light on that I can actually figure out my best way to get in and out of this piece, you know, for future hunts. Yep. So, you know, I gave up 15 minutes of gray light hunting to map out my access route for in and out of this piece that's going to be as low impact as possible. So
I understand that, but there's been several times in the years that I've done this that, you know, I get out of the tree again, half hour after dark. That's my typical thing, is half hour after dark, I get out of the tree. I want all the deer to pass by me and be gone, so I'm not screwing anything up with my exit. And I mean, on a FI or on a DIY hunt, when you exit and you have no clue where you're going, but you don't want to exit the way you entered because you know you're going to spook deer that direction. Mm-hmm. I've ran into some real issues when in the dark, you know, run into the swamps or bogs that are, you know, it's just muck and you fall down to your waist.
Well, that was what happened. Yeah. That's what happened on my entrance. It's like I was at the edge of this swamp because I wanted to check it, and like I got into it, and then I was into the mud, then I was into cattails trying to bushwhack my way through, and I was just like, once I got through all of it, and I'm climbing through briar patches, and once I got through it, I was like, there's no way in hell I'm coming back through this. I was like I gotta find
a morning entry.
Yeah, I was like, I gotta find a better way, you know. So I found a better way in. So the other step is I would have some really good access if I can get some permission just to access some people's ground, because once I get up to I guess it would be the south. So if it's the south, it'd be the west side of this property. It's all lined with homes. And so better access would be getting through. And so I knew my exit route was getting up by the property lines of those homes, because I knew it would be a little cleaner, and there was just a little bit of elevation. And so that's basically where I went and walked it down to where I was, you know, ultimately going to get out to where my truck was at. And so the one move is, I've already actually talked to one, because there's actually a dog kennel that borders it. And so I actually stopped in like a week ago and, you know, asked to talk to the owner to see if I could get access just to walk through their parking lot, because I can actually get basically into the middle of like all the good stuff I want to be in by walking through their parking lot down over like the bank behind their property. So if I can get that, I'll be aces. Like it'll be super clean in and out no matter what part I want to hunt on that property. I just got to fingers crossed Clint, I get access.
Clint, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you said that, because don't be shy to ask people that live in the area if you could park your vehicle and use their property as an access. A lot of times they're going to say no, but once in a while they may say yes, and it makes all the difference in the world.
Yep.
And again, when I was talking about headlamps, I don't know how many times I'm in my tree during the rut phases on morning hunts anyway. I'm in my tree, set up and quiet an hour and a half before daylight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to spook anything with my entry because mature bucks have a tendency to move back into the bedding areas a half hour to 45 minutes before daylight in Michigan anyway.
Right.
Not Kansas or other states I've hunted. So one thing I've noticed on public lands is I'll be in my tree an hour and a half before daylight, and during rut phases when the foliage is down, I'll see these. Once in a while I'll see these headlamps come in, and then it's just funny because they're spooking deer, and I've had many times I've had deer run by me, half hour before daylight when they're coming in, mm-hmm. and just run by me, and they're spooking from this guy, and the headlamps is just going. It's shining all over the place. And those beams on, everybody, when they buy a headlamp, they want one with the most lumens,
Exactly.
They're not worried about having it low light. They want it as bright as they can so they can see. And boy, it's always best just to have enough light to see the ground. And if you're using tacks or some kind of markers, to see your next marker.
Yeah. And I like the point that you made about, asking for access. Cause I just got access through someone's property for this one piece that I hunt. And because they border it, and I basically park like half a mile away from them, because I told him, I was like, I don't even want to park in your driveway. I was like, it's fine. I was like, I have a spot that I park down the road. I was like, I'm good there. I was like, I just want to literally be able to walk the edge of your yard, like the point furthest from your house. I want to be able just to walk the edge of the yard, like to get in behind your house. I was like, because your property line borders this piece of property that I have access to. I was like, and I'll be coming in and out right along the edge of your property. I was like, I just want to let you, I was like, I'll give you a heads up when I come by. I was like, that way, if I'm coming out in an evening, you won't be freaked out by, someone walking out at night. I'll let you know when I'll be in here. They're like, oh yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. No worries. So, even if I always start by saying, I'm parking a half mile away from you. I'm going to walk up and can I use the edge of your yard? And then they're usually like, yeah. And then a lot of times they'll even say, well, why don't you just park over here? So I usually even leave that out, and then I'll let them kind of add that in if it's something they're willing to do. But I'm willing, because look, that extra half hour or that extra half mile walk is nothing if I don't have to walk that in the timber and I'm able to walk it along a road. You know what I mean?
Oh,
so
huge, absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I've got one spot where I come across an open field, and they've never had it in standing corn. It's always been a low crop field. I'll come across it and I carry my waders, and then I cross a river. And then I've got a tree like 20 yards off the river. Mm-hmm. So the deer come out of the timber, and they'll cross that river going out into the crops in the evening. So this, again, it's an evening location.
Yep.
But my exit, because I'm not going to cross the river and go back out and spook deer that are out in that field after dark, I probably only walk a quarter mile, mm-hmm. 3/8 of a mile to go to this location through the field and across the river. My exit is probably a mile and a half.
Right.
I have to go back around through the perimeter of the timber, walk this lane, and then walk it back out to the road, and then I got to walk down a road about a quarter mile and then back down another road about a half a mile to my vehicle.
Yep.
Just so I'm spooking deer with my entry and or my exit. Exits and entries are pretty critical. And it's just the opposite for a morning, obviously. If you're entering a morning spot, you want to come in through the timber, mm-hmm. Through the timber if there's deer out in crop fields, and then enter your spot through the timber and then exit through the crop field. And again, you don't walk the edge of the crop field when you're exiting. You walk out into the weed field or crops or opening or whatever, and then out to the middle and then leave from there. So because there's no deer out there in the morning after you're hunting, so you're not spooking anything with your exit.
Yep. So I think we had some pretty good tips for entry and exit. I think if you're cool with it, we will move on to part number 2, hunting interactive scrapes. All right, folks, that's a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We'd be super appreciative if you do those 2 things for us. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, Gumleaf USA Boots, Obsession Bows, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and dead downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.